What's up, good people of TW Local 100 and all transit workers out there? This is Transit Workers for a Fighting Union, and we're doing a new video format where we're doing this new program called Third Rail, where we plan on talking about various issues as they come up and try to provide a path forward. So what brings us together this time around is we want to talk about Zohran Mamdani. And this is a particularly fun topic to talk about because there's been so much hoopla over his campaign, everything ranging from him being a raging jihadist to crazy-eyed communist and whatnot. There's a lot of hysteria about his win in the city. And so what we want to talk about is we want to talk about what this means for transit workers. When we're putting it, I don't know, Zohran Mamdani, is he the next best thing for transit workers, or is he just more of the same crap, different toilet, as I like to say? That's precisely what we're going to talk about. But the main thing is everyone's aware, anyone who's been familiar with Transit Workers for a Fighting Union, we ran on an explicitly socialist campaign during the last elections. And what I want to do here is I want to read a point from it to kind of set the stage to this discussion. And this is the fifth point on our campaign for e-board. And here's how it goes. Oppose the Democrats and Republicans. Workers should run the country. Whether it's Trump or Harris at the helm, in this case Mamdani, working people will lose. The union tops keep telling us to vote for Democrats, but you can't fight the bosses if you're in bed with their political parties. And on that note, I want to begin this discussion on why us in the TWFU did not advocate a vote for Zohran Mamdani. Unlike some of the other progressives in the TWU, such as Local 100 Fight Back, who were very active in mobilizing people to vote for Zohran. In fact, there was no choices available for workers in this election. So, Tom, you want to give it a shot?
Yeah, let me give it a shot. It's a very interesting period, a very interesting election. Mandani Mania has infected probably not the working class so much, but the petty bourgeoisie, people feeling in a serious pinch. Both many newspapers are talking about the Mandani phenomena. As Eddie indicated, he's a socialist. He thinks of himself as a socialist, but he's not a socialist as we understand it to be, which is someone who would fight for the working class to run society in its own interests. In fact, his project is pretty much to rejuvenate, rebrand the Democratic Party because it's been suffering such a huge setback. And anything that involves the Democratic Party is going to be to preserve capitalist rule, to preserve Wall Street's power. He's going to be beholden to the billionaires and so forth. But interestingly, like, affordability crisis is a very real thing in New York City. And we also have, since our inception and before, have fought for much higher wages, much higher benefits, much for the transit workers and for the working class in general. And we also, as another one of our demands, was that we moved New York, we should be able to afford to live here. I think what's interesting about that is the working class in New York knows that so intrinsically. Every single day you're working alongside you and your coworkers, working 8, 10, 12, 16 hours a day, going through tremendous commutes to get to and from work. Some people working 2 or 3 jobs if they're lucky to have a job just to make rent. And I think people have observed that Mandani phenomena was partly because it's just so grotesquely expensive to live, not only in New York City, but throughout the country. But how are we going to resolve those kinds of problems? That's going to take a serious confrontation with the real estate moguls, with the bankers, with the capitalist class, and with the bourgeoisie in New York City, because they're not just going to give up either higher wages for us, better pensions, or real housing for the mass of the population. So that's going to be a serious clash that's going to take place. That's one aspect. I know that a lot of my coworkers, they were voting, either not voting. Quite a number were voting for Curtis Sliwa.
Yeah.
Which is an expression of people's concerns over capitalist decay and crime, because Sliwa, who we think is a clown, a red beret clown, who is totally in the service of the right wing Republicans, but he's in the service of racist law and order. Let's face it. At the end of the day, he's a a partisan of Trump, a partisan of the most backward elements of the capitalist class, capitalist law and order. We're for law and order too, but we're for law and order of the working class. And that's
Absolutely.
a very, very different kind. Like, the transit workers really need to organize ourselves and make our union a fighting union and a powerful union. Like the rest of New York City labor, we need to fight independently for our interests and have absolutely no confidence in Zohran Mamdani or his mayoralty, or what he's going to be doing is just same old story of trying to fold all these struggles back into electoralism. Wait for the next vote. Don't struggle. Zoran's taking care of it, or the Democratic Party is going to take care of it, or that's the best you can ever hope for. Of course, liberalism is completely discredited.
One thing that's very clear of whether it would have been Sliwa winning, Cuomo winning, or Mamdani, it doesn't affect what the tasks of us, the working class, needs to do, which is to fight not only to advance, for higher wages, for safety and whatnot, but also to fight for a party that fights for ourselves, a workers' party. That is still on the order of the day, independent of all the parties of the bosses. But what's very clear, and this is a misconception that a lot of people have, is that Mamdani is not the product of working class anger and insurgency. In fact, it's quite the opposite of that. In fact, you could view his campaign and his election as a preemptive act in order to squash any sort of independent action on the part of the working class in the midst of growing immiseration under the Trump regime and the growing misfortunes of American capitalism. That's just a fact, whether Democrat or Republican. So what would be good to talk about would be some of the positive aspects, because we're not all doom and gloom about Mamdani. That he actually does talk about some things that we do support, like, for example, like the free childcare for everyone. Is totally, anybody can get behind that. That's, of course, a great thing. But the other thing is the question of free buses. I mean, you want to take a stab at that question, concerns that transit workers would have?
I agree with your point that, if there was active struggle by Local 100 or other unions in New York City for higher wages or better work conditions, or just being able to live comfortably and raise a family in New York, this election would have been completely different. And I also agree with your point that Zoran's role is going to be to put a lid on any potential struggle, because the questions that Mayor Mamdani's campaign was running on, affordability, rent, whether, it's cost of living or rent, his solutions are at best going to be kind of a drop in the bucket to kind of really deal with it. He wants to use his control of like the rent stabilization board to like freeze rents for a year for a few million rent stabilized units, but it's really not going to have much real effect for the rest of the housing market, which is still overly priced, still rotting. There is no construction in New York that isn't for like luxury housing units that remain empty. Those require revolutionary solutions, and
Absolutely.
Zoran's campaign was not offering that. Zoran's campaign is, and I agree with the points you were making, his campaign is there to kind of give liberalism maybe a second chance, because it's a dying political movement in this country. He's doing that, with pretty minimal demands. At best, despite any good intentions that he may have or whatever, his program, his way forward is going to frustrate any movement towards creating a New York that that working people can live in. Besides, I know that before the campaign, he worked overtime to meet with the big city bosses. I forget the name of the boss. There's like a coalition of like New York City finance heads and like healthcare execs that he met with repeatedly to like assure them that he's not going to step on their toes. They're going to go ahead and make sure that they can conduct their business. And like Eddie said, he met with the kill crazy NYPD several times to make sure that don't worry, So I don't have any illusion personally that he's gonna really kind of stop the downward spiral that is conditions here in New York City.
Oh, Richard, isn't he he's not the first Democratic Socialist to run New York?
Yeah, you reminded me that Mayor Dinkins was a Democratic Socialist. So so it's not.
And they'll take it from me. That was his slogan.
And he hired,
Dinkins.
He hired plenty of cops.
Yeah, Dinkins was elected on a program of being okay, there's going to be austerity, but I will be.
Take it from me.
Yeah, they will take it from me. I'll be the New York City mayor that will be able to explain to New York City residents that you're going to feel the pain, but they'll I'll convince them that it's okay. That was kind of like his role in the eyes of New York City political leaders. Yeah, the big developers and the finance class and stuff like that.
I was just gonna say, just wait till Mamdani cracks down on pro-Palestinian protesters, right. Man. A lot of people are gonna be real frustrated at that. But he's running as the head representative of the Democratic Party, a capitalist party that is beholden to U.S. interests abroad, and which is, of course, propping up the blood-soaked Israeli regime.
I think it's really important to pay attention to what he's talking about, his program. You can read it online when he talks about what he wants to do with the NYPD. Like his essential objection is that the NYPD is working too hard at something that isn't their job. That's basically what he's saying. He's objecting to the fact that the NYPD is responding to mental health care crises, issues that are he claims outside the scope of their work. So what he wants to do is create a different city body that is designed to respond to quality of life cases, if you want to call it that. So he's not essentially touching the core of the NYPD, which is, the armed body in New York City, the civil armed body that maintains the status quo in society, which means, anti-immigrant bigotry, anti-black racism, anti-poor policies in New York. That's the status. Anti-labor policies for sure. So he's not gonna touch that stuff, right? He wants to make sure that the PD doesn't waste their time with failures of the social safety net. And instead, the PD can do their real jobs, which, and I think the deal with maintaining Tish as the police commissioner is just evidence of that. That was kind of a clear signal to everybody, especially the powers that be in New York City, that he's not gonna change anything with the NYPD. Essentially, he's going to keep the power structure the same. He's going to make sure that the people calling the shots internally are going to be kept there. That machine is still going to function the way it has functioned.
Yeah. I mean, free up the NYPD to do what they do best, and that's to beat the crap out of like young black youth in hoodies. It's anyways. Yeah, none of this bodes well. Another thing too that we want to touch upon is the question of, or more lack of, a clear, coherent stance on labor.
Well, a lot of these democratic socialists, like Mamdani, talk about the need to make unions powerful again. Well, guess how unions were built? Through strikes, and major strikes at that. And especially here in New York State, the Taylor laws, it was formulated to prevent labor from using its power, from using its muscle. It was a direct result of the 1966 transit strike, which was the labor battle that made this a decent job for at least a generation. And both Democrats and Republicans are fervent believers in the Taylor law. This should surprise no one, but I remember back in the early 2000s when we were preparing, the transit workforce was extremely frustrated, and there was a rising period of militancy. And Hillary Clinton came out to she actually came to one of our mass meetings, but she was quoted in that same day or so that she was in town as saying the Taylor law is a wise law, and I completely support it. And you'll be hard pressed to find any Democratic Party politician that does not defend and will utilize, like Spitzer did, like others have, utilize every provision of the Taylor law to attack labor when it does go out into battle. One example is Hochul's recent. She was terrorized at the thought of a Long Island Railroad strike and was threatening to do anything possible to prevent them. And as a matter of fact, they didn't go on strike. But we need the strike weapon in order to defend our livelihoods, to defend ourselves, and to make unions possible.
Yep.
So I think there's a reason why he's not talked about the Taylor law at all. I'm sure his friends in the trade union bureaucracy, which are totally beholden to the Democratic Party, are not pressing the point. They're because they don't want labor unrest from their membership either. But the Taylor law is a burning question that any militant youth or socialist-minded worker or militant worker knows is an acid test for a real pro-working class politician. Where do you stand on that question? Zohran is at best silent, and I suspect has already pledged that he will support that law. I was wondering, maybe some of us could expand on the free buses demand.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could take a little swing at that, because I think that's one of the more controversial aspects, I think, for those of us in transit, especially. A lot of people seem to be under this idea that in transit, if you make the buses free, that's gonna basically allow all the riffraff and all the criminal element to just ride the trains incessantly. And the other thing too is that it's gonna, like, where are we gonna get our money for our raises and whatnot, and this and that. I've heard also some absurd notions that it's gonna cut back on our, what do you call that, our leverage, were there to be a strike, precisely because of the money. But the real deal, the leverage comes from getting from point A to point B, not whether buses are free or not. In fact, us in Transit Workers for a Fighting Union, and we've rendered this very clear in previous videos, we're actually for free quality mass transit for all, and for a massive expansion of the public transit system. because that's actually one of the concerns that's been brought up, is that how it's designed now in a for-profit, which doesn't really generate all that much of a profit. I mean, I think a lot of the TA's funds actually come from tolls, bridges, and whatnot. But regardless of the fact, it's a public good. And that's part of the reason that, like, if you look at the history of New York City Transit, it's never been profitable. Like the fact that you have a A and B division, the IND, RMT, IRT got together was because they could not turn a profit. It's a public good. You're always going to be losing on a public good. For example, if you look at the Staten Island ferry, that's free.
It's free.
It's free.
No one's asking them to pay money.
Exactly. It is the bottom line for the bottom line for us is like, what is good for the working class?
Right.
Those questions of like where the money's going to come from, well, that's going to be settled in the course of waging hard class struggle against the bosses and whatnot. And we all know that they have more than enough money. And you could just take a look at where all this money is being spent. Billions upon billions of money being like lobbed off to Ukraine, lobbed off to fund the military campaigns against Venezuela, billions for Israel. Really? They don't have money for transit? I'm sorry, bro, but free mass transit for all. The idea that you can't, transit, like, can't afford that, that's because you've been propagandized.
That's the strategic importance of our demand for free mass transit too, is that it's we want to build unity within our industry, but also with the residents of New York City, the riding public, many of whom are our siblings, our families, and we want to undo this this fairy tale that the company made, that in order to have higher wages you need to increase the fare. Like, that's just not true. It's a decision made by the people in charge of our society. If you want something, you make the decision to fund it. They don't want to pay for quality mass transit for working people in New York. They, let alone have it free. So, that's who has to be challenged on it. So, they do have the money for it. They just don't want to because it's not their priority. So
certainly, the U.S. imperialism is in deep crisis, and both parties have an interest in maintaining and trying to hold on to U.S. imperialist hegemony, which is slipping away. And they're going to try to make the working class pay for this crisis, one way or the other. There's a reason why a lot of the commentary recently has talked about the fiscal crisis of in the mid-1970s, because that was a time when the American bourgeoisie also decided to, all its crises are both endemic to capitalism, but also they're social crises that are generated and maintained by the ruling class to make sure to drive down the cost of labor and to contain labor, to contain the working class, which is the multiracial American working class is the one agency in this society that has the power, the interest, and potentially the ability to transform this into really a socialist America where people would not have to worry about health care, jobs, pensions, education, all these things. So in the 70s crisis, a somewhat engineered crisis, they really wanted to clamp down on workforces like the transit workers who had gone on strike in '66, sanitation workers, hospital workers, city workers who were organizing, among others, bridge workers and others who were really in a rebellious mood in the previous decade. And they did clamp down on it. And guess who they got to pay to bail out New York City? Well, it was the city workers' pensions funds.
Yep.
That's what they did.
Yeah, the teachers, right?
Absolutely. The teachers went on strike. So, but now U.S. imperialism faces its biggest threat, I think, with China, and they are seeing their power slip away. We need to look out as working people in the United States for all the victims of U.S. imperialism, whether they're in Venezuela, Mexico, no matter where, China, anywhere else, because Trump, that's part of their preparing. But I didn't want to say that it's not just Trump, it's the Democratic Party.
Yep.
So in the two-party system, having a good cop and a bad cop, having the Democratic Party is historically the party of war in the United States, because they have a better ability and more to mobilize the population historically. Of course, Trump in the recent past has tried to adopt his base as the working class, which is coming out as a cruel joke. Even now, as we see things.
Or remember the ceasefire that supposedly Kamala Harris was working tirelessly for, according to AOC. And again, AOC is of the same type as Zohran Mamdani in terms of people who put themselves forward as like these progressives, these democratic socialists that are different from like the same old song and dance of the Democrats who, nope, same crap, different toilet. All it is.
Yeah, Zoran has different methods from Trump and the Democratic dinosaurs, but still the same perspective of salvaging American capitalism and U.S. imperialism. And that's really why he met with Bloomberg and the other titans of in the industry in New York City. I also thought it was interesting, like all our own union leadership just last week went down to Puerto Rico to meet with the Democratic Party state establishment to figure out what they were going to do with these new conditions. But really, they have been in bed with the the bosses for so long that they're containing our power.
I think the real deal is that people shouldn't get discouraged by what happened or anything like that. There's a lot of illusions out there, and then there's a lot of things where I think a lot of people rightfully sat this election out. You got to remember, a lot of people voted in this, but the majority of New York City did not vote. It's not like Mamdani has like a mandate or something like that, even remotely. I think people rightly think that let's see what happens. And I think that's a total rational way of looking at things, but it doesn't mean, again, doom and gloom. I think what us as transit workers got to do is we have a contract coming up. There is a number of things that we can do to rebuild our union, to actually start fighting back. And a good starting point is we've been very active in this campaign to get Brother Andy Valentine's job back. Hopefully everyone has seen this flyer going around, but this is a concrete example of the type of work that we need to do. What this is like, an injury to one is an injury to all. Valentine should never have faced any discipline for what happened. But that's a concrete example. We started this committee in order to get his job back, and you should check out our videos. We'll include some links in the video to check out previous videos that we did with various oppositionists.
Both brothers and sisters from Fight Back and from Stronger Together, who have both been long-time oppositionists within the union, and it's very important that we all come together, no matter who we are within Local 100, to fight and defend victims of MTA disgusting plantation justice. And so having that united front defense work is really key. At the same time, part of what this video is all about is talking about issues where we may not, where we don't agree, as Eddie mentioned. Fight Back supports Mandani. I know that Evangeline Byers supports Mandani. Our own TWFU 100 leadership was silent, but they're going to toe the line, whatever the Democratic Party says. But we're going to fight within the union for an independent course, one that is opposed to both Democrats and Republicans, a truly socialist, revolutionary perspective.
When the time comes and there's a challenge between working class interests, which is higher wages and our ability to kind of defend our safety on the job or, our working conditions on the job. And if that ever comes into conflict with the interests of the city bosses or the MTA, the Mayor Mamdani is going to choose the interests of the bosses. That's kind of what's going to happen. You're going to see that. But I guess what I want to double underline is that there is a way forward, and it is by relying solely on the independent organization of working people in the city. We have our own interests to pursue, and what we need is a leadership that's willing to kind of organize that, lead it, point it in the right direction, and not lead it into the arms of the social democratic flavor of the month, which is just going to tie our hands and make sure, and ensure that we get nothing that we need. So, Andy Valentine's case is super important. Click whatever links are below us to find out about his case. If Mayor Mamdani were here, I'd be like, you know what? You're for working people. Help us get his job back, just to challenge his program, because here's
open police archive.
You wanna exactly. You wanna make sure that the police don't turn another subway station like Sutter Avenue into a shooting gallery. Open the police archives. Go in there, break up the cabal that is, the NYPD police department. You won't, though. You're right, because you won't, because he's the mayor of New York City. The police belong to him now. All right, get real. So, but yeah, Andy Valentine's case is super important because it's in the interest of everyone to fight for Andy, because now you can't use the truth to defend yourself. If you read his case, the truth doesn't matter because the company made up out of whole cloth a story to rail him and fire him over. So, if you which is scary. So we gotta. It's deeply important that we struggle to get him his job back. It's in all of our interests. So I was long-winded, but yeah.
And just one last thought is that, as Eddie said at the beginning, Mamdani's victory was not the result of a huge working class upsurge. But it's up to us in the bastions of labor power in this city to dig in and get ready, prepare for the fights ahead. And some of those fights are going to be for our very livelihood and well-being. Other fights are going to be for immigrants who are facing ICE terror, or against, the drive for war, whether it's against Venezuela or wherever, or against China or somewhere else. And but we do need to look out for all the oppressed, and that's going to redound to our benefit as workers, and we need to look for a real socialist solution.
Yeah, that's right. Well, anyways, I think this was very good. Towards independent labor action, brothers and sisters. Good night.
Good night.